I can give Laurie a kiss because
Yeah, no.
we've been talking about this for a long time. In fact, you were probably, when I joined the Atlantic was about 7 years ago, and probably about 6 years ago, you were the first person to ever give me a quick education and said, Steve, this matters.
Yes.
So I want you to share with our audience here. Many of them are here. They've self-selected to come tonight, but I was so impressed with your obsessiveness about this issue. How did you get into really the lung cancer fight?
First of all, Dr. Marks, what a wonderful conversation. It was just lovely to hear it presented in such a thoughtful and easily understood way. I guess I've always been a fighter for the underdog. My background has been public service for many years, and when I left government, a two-time survivor, of which there are very few at that time, came to me and said, we have to build a movement for this disease. It does not exist. There is no compassion. There is no coordinated or comprehensive approach to this disease. There's a terrible stigma. There's no research funding. And this community deserves better. And I said, you're on. Let's do this. And the organization, Lung Cancer Alliance, which was founded over 20 years ago by patients, survivors, did a little bit of a refresh on the advocacy front and really stuck a flag in the sand to demand from our public health community that they needed to do better. And the opportunity to talk with thought leaders and those who could share stories and influence ideas and opinions was one of our core priorities among many other strategies to truly put lung cancer on the playing field of a national public health priority.
You know, I know that you have been out there and one of the leaders in sort of saying, move beyond the cigarette issue,
Yes.
move beyond smoking.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you feel like you're succeeding, because I think on the broad issue of whether you call it stigma or people saying that's their fault. I went through that and I saw that in the HIV arena.
Exactly.
I've seen that in the other arenas. Are we getting to a point where you feel like we're moving beyond that, or are we still stuck in that rut?
The good news, we're making progress. And I want to share the statistic to put it in a bit of a perspective. Certainly, tobacco is a risk factor for lung cancer. But as it is for many other types of cancer, heart disease, many other types of diseases, but it has never been a reason to not advocate for early detection and treatment research in those situations. 80% of the people today who will be diagnosed with lung cancer, 80%, either have never smoked or quit decades ago. So what does the message, the only public health message of don't smoke, do for the vast majority of those who will find themselves diagnosed with the disease? It doesn't. So if you think of a three-legged stool, you always have a prevention and wellness leg, an early detection leg, and a treatment research leg. That's why the stool stands. For lung cancer, it has only been don't smoke. And even if everybody stopped smoking today, this disease would be the leading cause of cancer death for decades to come, because it is one that up until now, with some recent developments, has been tucked away, stigmatized, not thought about, misdiagnosed, to the point that many who find themselves with the disease are at very advanced stage and don't live long enough to actually be a voice to advocate for a more coordinated and comprehensive approach. That's why our organization certainly supports a prevention message. But where the gap was advocating for the early detection and treatment research that this disease deserves as the disease that it is, not just an addiction that it is.
Now, you have impressed me by getting a moment of bipartisanship in the U.S. Congress.
Can you imagine?
And you've got a congressional caucus on lung cancer that's working. I know they're doing that. And I don't know whether people fear you or just, you know, what the deal is, but you've driven a lot of research dollars. And I'd love to hear a little bit about this story. I'm sure people would like to hear a little bit about what, I mean, we never hear that the government is doing anything.
Right.
So what is the government doing that you've helped do? And when you look at this, it's kind of like I talked to Dr. Marks. I am interested in this question of advanced research. I spent a lot of time with some of the leading innovators, people in immunotherapy, people in industry that are creating unbelievable opportunities in precision medicine that changes the course for a lot of folks. Where do you see the map of research going? And tell them how you kind of kicked the butts of a bunch of congressmen.
Well, there is a good story to tell about government that can work and can do it in a bipartisan way. And I think it speaks to the disease, because what we found as being literally the only boots on the ground and a small handful of advocates who joined us to share their story and demand more in the early days, which is what it takes, is that so many people are touched by the disease. And they've been afraid to say it. They've been afraid to acknowledge it because they were afraid they'd hear, well, you must have smoked, so it's your fault, you get what you deserve. Inevitably, every office that we went into and began saying, this is the leading cause of cancer death. It's almost 30% of all cancers. The survival rate has not even budged since we began the war on cancer. How can this be? So I think because we touched something that really resonated with members themselves, with staff, every office we went in, we heard the story, I lost my aunt. And so we began unleashing what had been the 800-pound gorilla that no one wanted to talk about. And in fact, set a standard that we were only going to do this if we could do it in a bipartisan way, and if we could do it with both the House and the Senate, so that we could show that this really should be a national public health priority. There is no politics, no partisanship around this. This affects everyone. And we worked hard and we built awareness and coalitions. We have been able to introduce landmark legislation that was signed into law. New strategic frameworks are now underway in the NCI. And we, in fact, created a dedicated research pipeline that no one thought possible. That with last week's bill,
has it been resilient during this administration?
Yes, it has.
Wow.
And for the last 9 years, we now have over $130 million that has been directed to a dedicated research pipeline that's in the Department of Defense. But with that said, every year we go back and get a little more and a little more. But as we grow survivors and stronger in our voices and our stories, we are engaging more and more to recognize that this really is something that is impacting all of us and frankly has been left tucked away way too long. So I think that giant is now coming forward.
I'm also...
and yes, I have been called the militant one because I don't take no for an answer.
I know, but one of the other things I
and proud of it.
Was impressed with Dr. Marks, who just spoke, is he said, one of the leading cancer guys in the country, he just said, radon matters. Yeah. Radon's bad. There are a lot of people that think fracking is bad, other sorts of particulates that have come in have been bad. I'm interested in bank shots. Do you think you need to become an environmentalist as well as a lung cancer research advocate? And in the sense that when you kind of look at the broader communities, I want to open this up because I've got my environmental guy over here who's really ready to go on this. The mic, just folks, he wants the mic over here in a minute, I'm sure. But when you're looking at this broad sector, one side is sort of to go directly, earnestly, with research and funding. That's what Joe Biden is doing. Right. But there's the other side of it to look at the other exogenous factors that are going on. And I've always, it was one of Bill Gates' major mistakes early on in Africa, and both the Packard Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation realized they couldn't just be out there about providing drugs. They had to look at the ecosystem of what was going on broader in that community. How much do you get into that stuff?
2 points on that. Our goal has been to fill gaps. We're not going to be the research experts on environment, but we sure can help advocate for funds that can get to those and more researchers to get that answer. So I don't claim and would never claim to be an environmental expert, but I sure want to help give them the tools to find those answers for our community. That's number one. But number two, our core focus are really people, those who could be at risk or living with this disease, and how can we be helpful to them no matter where they are in their journey with whatever it is they need. And so I think one of the things that we've tried to do is not duplicate or replicate, but think about where we can play the most critical role, fill the gaps that haven't been filled by others, and allow those who have the expertise to lead, but just do what we can to provide them the tools. Of course, the environment is one that needs to be more closely looked at and analyzed. Just as an example, our military men and women are exposed to incredible toxins and particulate as part of their occupation. So how do we develop and design research, screening, and studies that can look at particular exposures and then devise the right kind of treatment strategies around that? That's something that we are doing, looking at that within the VA, also looking at that within our DoD, because we know that there is research showing Agent Orange, burn pits, asbestos on submarines. Our military men and women have a 30% higher incidence as well as mortality than the civilian population.
Burn pits are hitting the news again now,
correct,
right, from Iraq.
Right.
Let me ask you to be mean and shrewd.
Yep.
When we're here in Pittsburgh, and I am I'm not being nice because I'm not a nice guy, but I'm very impressed with the diversity of people who've come here today from every corner. And so that tells me something right away. They're really interested in building capacity. But when you look at Pittsburgh, there's enormous capacity here. Go to Las Vegas. We were all in Las Vegas. Las Vegas needs help. Right. And everyone came out, and it's so impressive to me, the yearning, the desire for institutions, a national cancer center that they're establishing, trying to figure out how to do what the doctor was talking about with pathways of reaching part of the state. But you go, and communities are different. You go to Louisville, you go to Florida, which frankly, the doctor I met there blew me away with the way he talked about data sharing, he said, is the secret to solving this kind of a problem. So every community's been different. And I'd like to hear from you, who do you think is best in the country from a region in dealing with things? And what could our friends here in Pittsburgh most learn from that you think matters, in terms of separating outstanding success in moving forward versus feel-good stuff that doesn't matter?
Right. Wow, what an interesting question. And if I can back it up with this, we are not concerned with the capacities and the abilities of the academic centers. They have specialists, experts. They are working at a very high level, high-funded way. Our work has been to think about those communities where 80% of healthcare is actually delivered. That's where we have said, how can we as an organization work with communities to establish programs, everything from support programs to screening programs. And I will share that that is probably one of the brightest stars that we have seen when the scientific approval of CT screening for lung cancer came about. Within months, we said, if we cannot let what happened with mammography happen to lung cancer, because for those that may recall way back then, once the science validated mammography as a screening tool, it was just left to the communities to figure out how to develop their programs and their protocols. It took 20 years, and medicine was not practiced very well, and women were harmed. It took Congress stepping in and passing a law that put the right standards and guidelines and protocols in place. What we said is, oh my God, we can't let that happen, and particularly to this community. So we have to set up what we feel are best practice criteria and get this into the community settings now. And that has been what we call our Screening Center of Excellence, the national framework that has been providing a roadmap that is a standardized process with criteria that is ensuring that when someone calls us to say, where do I go to get screened? And they're in Pennsylvania, we can now point to those centers of excellence who are following the right protocols, using the right technology, have the multidisciplinary teams, have the kind of conversations that are occurring well and right. And the faster we can deploy that and work specifically in the communities, the better off we will all be for it. And so I would have to say, even in the most rural and least resourced, we are seeing some of the most amazing, committed first responders, as we've been calling them, doing work that, that many felt could never be done. And I won't get into the bloody details of what it took to get screening approved and eventually covered and reimbursed, but it's there, and it's hard for me to say one area has done it best, because I want to shout out to every single community now, over 550 centers of excellence in this network, that said we have a moral and ethical obligation to figure this out well and right now.
Will you come back to Pittsburgh more often to hang with these crowd?
Oh my gosh,
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Let
Absolutely.
me open the floor again to those of you. Where's I know she has a question, right? Do you still have a question, comment?
I'm not sure if relevant.
It's always relevant. I can make it relevant. And then my friend with orthopedics over here. Yes.
So my question is about, I think, partly due to some bad experiences and some research, that there are some people who believe that either frequent screenings can, or too early screenings can lead to unnecessary treatments. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on
Totally
that, how you would
relevant
advise
question.
people.
Thank you.
It's a great question, and it goes back to trying to figure out how to set up the right protocols and best practices from the start. And if you are following Dr. Marks mentioned this earlier, the NCCN guidelines, or even a pioneering research endeavor called ILCAP, the International Early Lung Cancer Action Program, they have said, here's how you screen, which is more than just a picture. It's what you do with what you find on that picture. And so that's why we're working very directly and in every way to make sure that the same standardized process is rolled out so that it would prevent that from happening.
Who's someone at the, was it ONC, ONS Foundation?
The
Just
Oncology
any
Nurse
of you.
Society?
Yeah, you're there. I mean, do you have, I learned that Pittsburgh is home base to, what do you call it?
Nurse Society.
Oncology
Yeah.
Nurses
Yay!
Society, based here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
So you control the country, right, by way of cancer nurses.
Sure.
But I am interested in, if I had you up on stage, I would ask you a question of how much are you able to affect, this is different than doctors, I understand, but sort of the literacy of the caregiving, caretaking, health community from where you are here on these kinds of issues. Is it hard or is it easy? Because I'm sitting and kind of have observed that I don't find as much evenness out there. So, because I think there'd be a good partnership between you guys.
Yeah, my name's Melanie
Yeah,
with
hi,
Oncology Nursing Society.
Yeah.
I think we're all in the same boat, us from a nursing perspective, whether it be the new treatments that are coming out and making sure nurses are educated and able to work with them, or screening programs, making sure they have the resources and information that they need.
So before you sit down, I don't know if you've read Sid Mukherjee's book, Emperor of All Maladies, on cancer. I mean, it's an amazing book. If you guys haven't read it, it's worth reading it.
Yeah.
It will horrify you about the practices that existed way too long in terms of cancer treatment. Certainly horrify me. And now he's writing about genetics. What do you think we need to do to help people get through into a next era of understanding how genetics-based, precision-based, immunotherapy oriented approaches there? What do we have to kind of retrain the entire infrastructure of health support?
I think that would probably be part of it, but at the community level, I think that's very important and something we have to consider. For us, we have 40,000 oncology nurses within our professional society, so we're always looking at ways that we can, again, educate them, because a lot of times they're the hands-on care that's taking place with the patients. So for us to be able to educate them, to educate patients, to educate families, that's what we're really looking to achieve.
Fascinating.
I have to give a big shout out to the nurses, because they are such, no offense, Dr. Marks, but the nurses, let me say, the nurses are critical and are the key navigators to this whole continuum of care that Johanna pointed out earlier. So.
And I want to give the mic to my friend here, whom I've just met, because I know you're a radical.
Oh, right. I'm not. My name is Ned Katire. I'm a pediatrician, actually. Yeah. I'm also a cancer survivor. My screening test was my cancer was renal cell, kidney cancer. My screening test was a painful kidney stone in the middle of the night. And my surgery was obviously the best treatment, and that's why I'm standing here today. But I always think back and wonder, why me? Why did I get kidney cancer? And I have some thoughts as to why. But I think there's a perception that cancer is random, or it's because you had it coming, just like you said. So how can we get the idea out to the public? The cancer isn't so random. People understand, about smoking. They understand about alcohol. They understand about eating crap. They understand what some of the reasons are, but they don't really think about the air that they breathe or the water that they're drinking. So what advice would you have to increase awareness among the population that there are some things that are in their control that they can do? They can stop smoking, they can eat better, they can exercise more, but there are other things that they have to breathe 16 to 20 times a minute, every minute of every day of every year.
Great question.
It's a great question, and I wish I had the appropriate answer that would solve it immediately. I think that it involves how we go about public education, and particularly in areas where there are higher incidences of cancer, but maybe lower literacy, or where there are areas that are under-resourced or underserved that may not have the ability to truly understand the connection that for this action you're going to have this reaction. And it's going to take an enormous and collaborative effort to truly get in and educate, and not this current generation. It's the children. It's how do we start it there. And I do feel, and again, BMS is a great example with some of the work that we have been able to do that gets into exactly that. How do we get into these communities right now and look at what their needs are and then shape responses accordingly? And I know for the lung cancer community, beyond the education, it can be something as simple as even helping getting them to treatment, making sure their child can be looked after while they go and learn or get help. So there's so many variables to this that it's beyond just how do you teach, it's how can you help them access. But it has to start very early. And it's a big endeavor that we all have to commit in every way to do.
Yes, right here. We're going to bring you a mic because we're online. No, we've got a video camera that is loud as you are.
Hi there, how are you?
Perfect.
I do radio in the morning at iHeart radio stations. You know me as Bonnie
Awesome.
Diver.
Great. Yeah.
And I'm a cancer fighter in the afternoon.
Awesome.
Great.
So 15-year survivor breast cancer. So what you're talking about is the kids, but you know what? Especially in our underprivileged or lower income area, you can buy a 99-cent cheeseburger at McDonald's, but your salad's going to cost you $5. So at a very basic level, we're killing people, and it's because of what you can afford. And I don't expect you to have the answer to that, but if you're talking to Congress, if you can do something about that, I think that's a huge problem, because food is everything. We all need to eat, and that's the basic. Sugar and stress, that's number one, and what causes cancer in my book. And if we can, laugh a little bit more and eat healthy food and start them at a younger age, then we can really redirect how we end up getting this.
I love your comment, and I just want to say thank you, because I feel that is there are some quarters here, and I don't feel like that should be a partisan issue. I think that there are people that care about their children everywhere. I was very impressed. This is going to be a little bit off subject for a minute. The mayor of Oklahoma City, the red state, Republican mayor of Oklahoma City, They were appearing on the front pages of business magazines around the country as one of the fastest growing places in the country, but also one of the most obese places in the country. Yeah. And he got out and he got his community, and himself included, into a thing online where people registered, and the city collectively lost £1 million. So 25,000 people showed up. I think it was 25,000 to 40,000 people. But what impressed me was that with that came a marketing of communication, of health. And so the city began saying, you know, we need to create a more walkable city. Now, this is different than perhaps some of the cancer discussion we have, but it asks about the ecosystem. Right? How do you get the burger versus the salad versus, you know, a lot of these other health factors built into the DNA of thinking about a smarter city, a smarter community, a healthier community? And we'll end there.
It can overwhelm you when you think about this in this global way. So what you heard Steve just say and what you mentioned is that if you take a small step, and honestly, these issues could probably be better addressed starting as local and as small as possible, because that stone in that pond will create a ripple and a ripple and a ripple. It may be better, sure, you need to have these conversations grass tops, but what happens grassroots can have far more impact, and directly, and particularly if a community has a better sense, or a city, a state has a better sense of what its community needs. So I would argue that it's got to work both ways with that, you know, with that in mind.
Real quick, before we have someone come up and talk about living with lung cancer, is if you were to critique the media, my crowd, what are we most missing?
On the positive side, you are covering more stories. I mean, what is the true face of lung cancer? Human stories. I think the public has a perception of who gets it and why. And the more that you can feature the real face of the disease, a 20-year-old woman who's never smoked that gets it, and by the way, that is a growing population. Young women, 2/3 more likely than men to get lung cancer having never smoked. And it is that is growing, and we really don't know why, just as an example. But being able to showcase the disease in the real world way so that people understand that, wow, this is my neighbor. It'll give more humanness to it. And I think the more that you can talk about it, feature it, and most importantly, and I'll wrap up with this because I could talk all night. And we were prefacing this earlier before we started. We couldn't have this conversation 10 years ago. We were really angry, and we saw nothing happening, and there was no progress. But we're having a conversation about a very dynamic time that I want to leave with the community that's watching, that it's good. We're a long way from getting where we need to go. But within the last 10 years, we are increasing federal research funding that we're going to see grow exponentially. We now have early detection that we can target to the highest risk, but as we do that, we're going to learn who else can get screened beyond that. With 9 million people who are at risk right now, imagine when early detection can find that disease at stage 1, and you can live, and what that means. And most of the new immunotherapies, most of these new treatment breakthroughs that are coming through are in lung cancer. We are leading these discoveries that will only continue to go and grow because of this knowledge. So we now are at the best place to say we've built a movement. We're getting more research funding. We have early detection. We have new treatment options that are only going to increase. And so I want everyone to know we're in a good place, not the best place we want to be, but I think we're going to see progress move even faster than we thought we would be at this moment. So thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing this with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Laurie Fenton Ambrose, President and CEO of the Lung Cancer Alliance. Thank you so much.